The wooden house high in the Cedar Heights mountains seemed embraced by the mist on that autumn morning. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the smell of pine trees as Ethan Mitchell, a 42-year-old architect, watched his son Sam dine run across the damp lawn of the backyard. "Don't wander too far, Sam," Ethan shouted, while sipping hot coffee from his favorite mug. "The fog is dense today." The boy waved, not really paying attention. His energy was boundless even with the cold mountain air that made his fingers turn red. Sarah, Ethan's wife and a literature professor, appeared on the porch wrapped in a wool shawl. "He seems so happy here," she said, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "We did well to leave Boston." Ethan nodded, but his gaze was suddenly drawn to a specific spot in the garden. Near the picnic table, something contrasted with the pale green of the dew-covered grass. "What's that?" he murmured, placing the mug on the porch railing. Sarah followed his gaze, frowning. "A lost dog, perhaps?" Ethan descended the porch steps, walking cautiously toward the dark, motionless figure. Sam also noticed the presence and ran toward his father. "Dad, look, an animal!" exclaimed the boy, excited. As he approached, Ethan could better distinguish what he was seeing. It wasn't a dog. The dense black fur glistened with dewdrops, and the animal had an elegant, slender bearing. But what impressed him most were the eyes, two bright, attentive points that stared at him without blinking. "Sam, stay behind me," Ethan instructed, extending his arm to restrain his son. The animal, which resembled a fox but with larger proportions and unusual coloration, remained seated, observing them. It showed no fear or aggression, only an almost intelligent curiosity. "Sarah, get the phone," Ethan called, without taking his eyes off the creature. "I've never seen anything like this around here." Sarah quickly descended, phone in hand. Hand stopped beside her husband. A shiver ran down her spine. This isn't normal," she whispered, taking some photos. "It doesn't look like a common wild animal." The black fox tilted its head slightly, as if it understood what they were saying, its eyes fixed on Sam, who, unlike his parents, showed no fear. "It's beautiful," commented the boy, taking a step forward. "Sam, no," Sarah warned, pulling him back. But the creature made no sudden movement. It just continued observing, its long, thick tail occasionally touching the ground. "I'm going to post these photos in the town group," said Sarah, stepping back a few paces as she typed. "Maybe someone knows what this is." While the parents discussed, Sam couldn't take his eyes off the animal. There was something hypnotic about that exchange of glances. The boy felt a strange familiarity, as if he had seen that creature before, perhaps in a forgotten dream. The response to Sarah's posts didn't take long. Notifications began to sound on her phone, various theories emerging. "Must be some lost wild dog. Looks like a fox, but I've never seen one like that. Be careful, it could be dangerous." But one message in particular caught her attention. "Ethan," a biologist responded. "She says it could be a silver fox, an extremely rare genetic mutation." Sarah frowned, confused. "She's asking if we can keep the animal in place. She wants to come verify personally." At that moment, as if understanding the conversation, the fox rose gracefully. Its movements were fluid, almost supernatural in their elegance. It took a few steps toward the forest that bordered the property, stopped and looked back directly at Sam. The boy felt something strange, a sensation that this was not a simple, casual encounter. There was a purpose there, something he still couldn't understand, but that made his heart race with excitement rather than fear. "I think it wants us to follow it," whispered Sam. But when he took a step forward, the fox disappeared into the mist, as silent as a shadow at dusk. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. "Silver fox. But it's completely black," commented Ethan as he examined the photos Sarah had taken again. Night had fallen and Sam was already in bed, though his parents doubted he was sleeping. The boy had spent the entire day drawing the mysterious animal. According to Rachel Newman from the Mountain Protectors NGO, the coloration can vary, explained Sarah, reading the messages on her phone. She says she'll come tomorrow to check. Apparently, it's an important discovery for local biodiversity. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, restless. "There's something strange about all this, Sarah. Did you see how the animal looked at us? It seemed aware." A sudden noise from Sam's room interrupted the conversation. They found the boy sitting on his bed, surrounded by dozens of drawings, scattered across the bedspread. "Sam, it's past your bedtime," Sarah gently reprimanded, but her expression changed when she saw the drawings. They weren't just portraits of the fox. In each drawing, circular symbols surrounded the animal, complex geometric patterns that seemed to have some specific meaning. "Son, what are these circles?" asked Ethan, picking up one of the drawings. Sam shrugged with that carefree sincerity typical of children. "I don't know. I just felt like I needed to draw them that way." Sarah and Ethan exchanged concerned looks. "Have you seen these symbols before at school perhaps, or in some book?" The boy shook his head, yawning. "They came from the fox," he said simply, before settling back among the pillows. After collecting the drawings and turning off the light, the couple returned to the living room, now more apprehensive than before. "This isn't normal, Ethan," whispered Sarah, leafing through her son's drawings. "How would he invent such detailed and consistent symbols?" Ethan was about to respond when the living room lights flickered 3 times before going out completely. Darkness took over the house, broken only by the glow of the moon coming through the windows. "Must be the storm," murmured Ethan, heading to the window. The wind had increased and the trees swayed violently, but there were no signs of rain. That's when he saw it. Footprints in the damp earth of the garden, footprints that began in the middle of the yard, as if the creature had appeared out of nowhere and ended abruptly before the forest. Ethan felt a chill. "Sarah, come see this." As they observed the perplexing scene, the lights suddenly came back on, making them blink at the sudden brightness. When Ethan looked at the garden again, the footprints seemed to have disappeared, as if they had never existed. Did you see that?" he asked, confused. Sarah nodded, pale. Footprints, appearing and disappearing out of nowhere. She hugged herself, trembling slightly. "What's happening, Ethan?" The next morning, Rachel Newman arrived, a woman of about 40, with graying hair tied in a disheveled bun and lively eyes that conveyed experience and determination. She didn't seem the type of person who was easily impressed, but her expression upon seeing Sam's drawings was one of genuine surprise. "These symbols," she murmured, adjusting her glasses to examine them better. "They look similar to those found in some indigenous inscriptions in the region." "What do you mean?" questioned Sarah, serving coffee to the visitor. "The Cherokee who inhabited these lands had legends about guardian spirits that took animal form," explained Rachel, accepting the cup. "These symbols were used in rituals to communicate with these guardians." Sam, who was playing in the corner of the room, raised his head upon hearing that. "The fox is trying to talk to me," he stated with childlike conviction. Rachel looked at the boy with renewed interest. "Why do you think that, Sam?" "Because I dreamed about her last night," he replied, picking up a new paper to draw. "She was in the forest and called me by name, said she has something to show me." The adults exchanged concerned looks. "I need to see this fox," said Rachel, standing up. "Shall we look for it?" The group went out to the yard, but there was no sign of the animal. Sam seemed disappointed but not surprised. He moved away, distractedly drawing while the adults talked about possible rational explanations for the events. "Maybe it's just a lost animal," suggested Ethan, without much conviction. "And the footprints, well, I was tired, the light was dim." That's when they heard Sam shout. It wasn't a cry of fear, but of excitement. They ran to him, stopping abruptly at the scene. The black fox was sitting at the door of the house, as if patiently waiting for them. This time, under the clear morning light, they could observe it better. The fur wasn't exactly black, but such a dark gray that it almost seemed to absorb light, and there were silver reflections visible when it moved. "Amazing," murmured Rachel, advancing slowly. "It really is a silver fox, but with a melanic pigmentation I've never documented before." As Rachel approached, something strange happened. The air around seemed to vibrate, and an icy breeze cut through the environment, though the rest of the garden remained still. The birds fell silent, and a sense of suspended time dominated everyone. Time seemed to have frozen. Ethan felt a pressure in his ears, as if he were submerged in deep water. He saw Rachel extend her hand toward the fox, but her movements seemed to occur in slow motion. The atmosphere vibrated with an unknown energy. Then it happened. A blinding flash enveloped the animal, so intense that everyone needed to shield their eyes. When the light dissipated, seconds later, the fox had disappeared. In the exact spot where it had been sitting, there was a symbol etched in the damp earth, identical to Sam's drawings. "My God," murmured Rachel, kneeling to examine the mark on the ground. "This isn't possible." Sam ran to the spot, with an expression not of fear, but of pure admiration. "She went home," he said simply. "Home?" Sarah approached, still stunned by what she had witnessed. "What do you mean, son?" "She doesn't belong to this world," replied the boy, with impressive conviction for his age. "She came to get me." The declaration sent a chill down Sarah's spine, who exchanged an alarmed look with Ethan. "Sam, honey, that doesn't make sense," she tried to argue, but her voice trembled slightly. How could she rationally explain what she had just witnessed? Rachel stood up, taking photos of the symbol in the earth. "I need to make some consultations," she said, visibly shaken. "In 20 years studying the mountain fauna, I've never seen anything like this." The biologist promised to return the next day with more information and departed, leaving behind a family in a state of shock. That night, the Mitchell house seemed different. Small, inexplicable events began to occur. Objects changed places, lights flickered without apparent reason, and a strange silence hung over the property. Not the absence of sound, but a muffled quality, as if the air itself had become denser. "Maybe we should go back to Boston for a while," suggested Ethan, while helping Sarah put away the dinner dishes. "And run away?" she replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "This isn't something we can simply ignore, Ethan. We're facing something extraordinary." Ethan stared at her, surprised. Sarah had always been the rational, pragmatic one between them. Seeing her staying in the face of such inexplicable events was disconcerting. "What are you suggesting, then, that we believe in, what, supernatural phenomena, magical foxes?" Sarah sighed, leaning on the kitchen counter. "I don't know what to believe. I just know that running away won't solve anything. And then there's Sam." As if invoked by the mention of his name, the boy appeared at the kitchen door, hugging his pillow. "I can't sleep," he murmured, rubbing his eyes. "She's calling me again." The parents exchanged concerned looks. Sarah went to her son, kneeling, to be at his eye level. "Who's calling you, son?" "The lady of the forest," replied Sam. "She said she has something important to show. Something about our past." Ethan approached, trying to stay calm. "Sam, that was just a dream. Nobody is calling." "You." The boy shook his head, stubborn. "It's not a dream, it's the fox, or the woman who lives inside the fox." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in Sam's conviction that made it impossible to dismiss his words as mere childish fantasy. "Let's go back to bed," she said gently. "We'll talk more about this tomorrow." After putting Sam back to bed, Sarah found Ethan in the living room, nervously leafing through a book. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Something that makes sense, I suppose." That's when they noticed it wasn't an ordinary book. It was an old compendium about indigenous legends that Sarah had bought at an antique fair months ago and had never gotten around to reading. And most disturbing, it was open exactly to the page that mentioned a guardian of the mountains, described as a silver fox. "This was stored on the bookshelf in the office," murmured Sarah, perplexed. "How did it get here?" Ethan read the passage. Aloud, "The guardian appears before great changes as a messenger between worlds. Those touched by its presence are chosen for a journey of transformation." Sarah sat down slowly, feeling the weight of those words. "Chosen," she repeated. "Sam said the fox came to get him." The silence that followed was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. It was Rachel, her voice tense even through the line. "I discovered something about the symbols," she said, without preamble. They're Cherokee ritual marks, used to identify those with the gift of sight, people capable of seeing beyond the veil between worlds. "And what does that mean for us?" asked Ethan, his heart racing. "It means," Rachel replied after a pause, "that your son may have been chosen as a mediator, someone capable of communicating with the Guardians." When they hung up, the couple remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of that information. The idea that their son might be connected to something so beyond common understanding was simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. "What do we do now?" whispered Sarah. Before Ethan could respond, they heard a scream from Sam's room. They ran desperately, only to find the room empty, the window open and the curtains swaying gently in the night breeze. "Sam!" Sarah's desperate cry echoed through the empty house. Ethan was already running to the yard, frantically calling for his son. There was no response beyond the howl of the wind through the forest trees. "He can't have gone far," said Ethan, trying to stay calm despite the growing panic. "I'll check the surroundings. You call the police." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling as she dialed the emergency number. As she explained the situation to the operator, her eyes scanned her son's room, looking for some clue. That's when she noticed something on the bed, a newly made drawing, different from the previous ones. This one showed a path through the forest, with the same circular symbols marking a trail to what appeared to be a cave. "Wait," she said on the phone. "I think I know where he went." Hanging up hastily, Sarah grabbed the drawing and ran to the yard where Ethan was examining the ground with a flashlight. "Look at this," she said, showing him the paper. "I think he headed for Swallow's Cave." Ethan examined the drawing, the concern evident on his face. "How does he know about that place? We never took him there." Swallow's Cave was a rock formation about 2 kilometers from the house, deep in the forest. A popular spot among tourists during the day, but potentially dangerous for a child alone at night. "It doesn't matter how he knows," replied Sarah, already putting on a coat. "We need to go there now." In minutes, they were traversing the forest trail, illuminated only by flashlights and the moon occasionally visible between the clouds. The silence of the night was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their steps and labored breathing. "Do you think this has to do with the fox?" asked Ethan as they avoided low branches. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Part of her, the rational university professor part, wanted to deny any supernatural connection, but another part, perhaps deeper and more intuitive, knew they were dealing with something beyond common understanding. "I think we need to keep an open mind," she finally said. "What we saw today can't be explained by conventional science." They continued in silence for a few minutes, until Sarah stopped abruptly, grabbing Ethan's arm. "Did you hear that?" A soft sound, almost like singing, was coming from somewhere ahead. It wasn't Sam's voice, but something more ethereal, a melody, without words that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. They followed the sound, veering off the main trail. As they advanced, the surrounding environment began to change subtly. The fog became denser, but, strangely, it didn't hinder visibility. On the contrary, it seemed to glow with its own light, illuminating the path. "This isn't normal," murmured Ethan, looking around with growing disquiet. A few meters ahead, they spotted the entrance to Swallow's Cave, and standing before it, small and vulnerable in the vastness of the night, was Sam. "Sam!" they shouted in unison, running toward him. The boy turned, but he didn't seem scared or lost. On the contrary, there was a gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Mom! Dad! You came!" he exclaimed, as if he had been expecting them. "She told me you would come." Sarah knelt before her son, frantically checking if he was injured. "Who told you that? Why did you leave in the middle of the night? We were so worried." "The Lady of the Forest," replied Sam, pointing to the entrance of the cave. "She's waiting. For us." Ethan looked nervously at the dark opening in the rock. "Sam, there is no Lady of the Forest. You can't leave like that. It's dangerous." The boy shook his head with that characteristic stubbornness. "She's real, and she knows you. Said she has something important to tell about our family." Sarah and Ethan exchanged confused looks. What their son was saying didn't make sense, But at the same time, after the events of that day, nothing seemed impossible anymore. "Let's all go home," decided Ethan, picking Sam up. "It's late and—" He was interrupted by a sudden glow coming. From the cave, a bluish pulsating light briefly illuminated the rocky entrance, accompanied by a low sound, like the vibration of a violin string. "She's calling," said Sam, trying to get down from his father's arms. "We need to go." Sarah, despite her fear, felt an irresistible curiosity. That light, there was something familiar about it, like a distant memory she couldn't quite reach. "Maybe we should check," she whispered, surprised by her own words. Ethan stared at her, mouth agape. "Are you suggesting we enter a cave in the middle of the night following— what? A mysterious light?" Sarah hesitated, torn between the inexplicable desire to advance and the fear of the unknown. She was about to agree to return home when a figure emerged from the shadows of the cave. It wasn't the fox. It was an elderly woman with snow-white hair and skin marked by time. She wore simple clothes of rustic fabric, and her eyes, the same penetrating eyes of the animal, fixed on the trio. "Finally," she said, her voice surprisingly melodious. "I've waited so long for you." Sam smiled as if meeting an old friend. Sarah and Ethan, on the other hand, were paralyzed, unable to process the sudden appearance of this stranger. "Who are you?" Ethan managed to ask, instinctively positioning himself in front of his family. The elderly woman smiled gently. "Someone who knows your true story, a story that began long before you imagine." She extended her hand to Sam, who accepted it without hesitation. To the absolute astonishment of his parents, a circular symbol briefly glowed in the boy's palm, the same symbol that had appeared in the yard, the same as in the drawings. "Come," invited the woman, turning to the cave. "There is much to reveal and time is running out. Retrais continuar, edit, continuando a tradução da história em inglês. Let me continue the translation of the story from Portuguese to English, maintaining the American names and locations that I've already established, and keeping the same tone and style. I'll pick up from where I left off, which was when the elderly woman invited them into the cave. Portuguese original names, English names I've established: Caio Martins, Ethan Mitchell, Mariana, Sarah, Pedro, Sam, Senhora da Floresta, Lady of the Forest, São Paulo e Boston, Campos do Jordão, Cedar Heights, Yara. I'll keep the name as is when we meet the character, Guaranese, Cherokee, since I'm Americanizing the setting. Gruta das Andorinhas, Swallow's Cave. I'll continue." The translation where I left off, the interior of the cave was not as they expected. Instead of the damp, claustrophobic darkness typical of caves, they found a spacious area, illuminated by a bluish glow that seemed to emanate from the rocky walls themselves. Crystals embedded in the stone reflected the light, creating a hypnotic spectacle of shadows and brightness. "Welcome to my sanctuary," said the elderly woman, guiding them along a natural path between the rock formations. Sarah kept Sam firmly by the hand, while Ethan followed behind, vigilant and suspicious. The sense of unreality increased with each step. "You still haven't told us who you are," Ethan insisted. The woman stopped in front of a wall where symbols identical to those in Sam's drawings were carved into the rock. Passing her wrinkled fingers over the marks, she replied, "I am called by many names. Guardian, Protector, Lady of the Forest. But my true name is Elena." "Like the legend?" asked Sarah, surprised. Elena smiled. "Legends always have a kernel of truth, distorted by time and men's imagination. I am not a mythical creature, but a guardian of the boundaries between worlds." Sam observed everything with silent fascination, his eyes reflecting the bluish glow of the walls. "What worlds?" asked Ethan, his voice mixing skepticism and curiosity. "This one that you know, and another that exists in parallel. A world where magic and the ancient spirits of the earth are still living, active forces." Eleanor turned to them, her penetrating gaze. "A world from which your family originated, Ethan." The silence that followed was as dense as the mountain mist. Ethan felt a strange tingling at the nape of his neck, a sensation of recognition that he couldn't explain. "This is absurd," he murmured, but without the conviction he would have liked to demonstrate. "Have you never wondered why you feel so connected to this land?" continued Elena. "Why, among so many places, you chose to build your house exactly here, so close to the boundary?" Ethan blinked, confused. It was true that the decision to buy that specific plot had been almost instinctive, something that even he couldn't explain rationally. "I don't understand," Sarah intervened. "Are you saying that Ethan isn't from this world?" Eleanor moved to a small natural spring that flowed from the rock. The water gleamed with the same bluish glow as the crystals. 7 generations ago, a guardian named Swift Arrow crossed the boundary and fell in love with a mortal. From that love was born a lineage of special children, human, but with a spark of the other world in their hearts. She looked directly at Ethan. "You are the 7th descendant of that guardian, Ethan, and your son Sam is the 8th. Sam gently freed himself from his mother's hand and approached the elderly woman as if magnetized by her presence. "That's why I can see the symbols," said the boy, "and hear the music of the forest." Elena nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at the child. "Exactly, little one. You inherited the gift of sight, the ability to perceive what is hidden from others." Sarah felt her heart race. The implications of that revelation were enormous, almost incomprehensible. But surprisingly, she didn't feel frightened or skeptical. There was a strange familiarity in those words, as if part of her had always known there was something special about her family. "Why reveal this to us now?" she asked. "Why not?" "Before?" Elena's countenance became grave. "Because the boundary between the worlds is weakening, and that isn't good for either side. The balance needs to be restored, and only someone with blood from both worlds can do it." She looked meaningfully at Sam, who returned the gaze with a seriousness surprising for a 9-year-old boy. "No," exclaimed Ethan, advancing. "If you're suggesting that my son has some kind of mystical mission, you can forget it. He's just a child." "A child with a purpose," replied Elena calmly. "Just as you had, Ethan, before you forgot who you really—" "Sorry, so what do you mean by that?" Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Elena took water from the spring with cupped hands and offered it to Ethan. "Drink and remember." Sarah stepped forward, protective. "How do we know we can trust you?" The elderly woman smiled gently. "You don't know, but your hearts do. That's why Sam found me. That's why you, Sarah, felt compelled to enter the cave. And that's why Ethan recognizes the truth in my words, even as he tries to deny it." Indeed, despite all the strangeness of the situation, there was a deep resonance in Elena's words, an echo of truth that was impossible to ignore. Ethan looked at the shimmering water in the guardian's hands, hesitant. Then, after a moment of contemplation, he leaned forward and drank. The effect was immediate and powerful. Images flooded his mind, forgotten memories of childhood dreams, visions of a world where trees whispered secrets and animals spoke in ancient languages. He remembered his grandfather telling stories about guardians and boundaries, stories he had considered mere folklore, but which he now recognized as fragments of a greater truth. When he opened his eyes again, there was a new understanding in his gaze. "I remember," he whispered. "Not everything, but enough to know that you're telling the truth." Elena nodded, satisfied. "The rest will come with time. Now, we need to prepare. The full moon is coming, and with it, the opportunity to restore the balance." The following days passed in a state of altered reality for the Mitchell family. They returned home after the night in the cave with a new understanding of the world, or rather worlds, and a purpose they still didn't fully understand. Rachel Newman returned the next morning, as promised, and was visibly surprised to find them so calm after the strange phenomenon with the fox. "You seem different," she commented, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. "Did something else happen?" The couple exchanged glances, unsure about how much they should share. Deciding who deserved to know the extraordinary truth they had discovered wasn't simple. "Let's say we had some revelations," replied Ethan cautiously, "about the fox and other things." Rachel studied them with keen eyes. "You found it again, didn't you? The silver fox." Sam, who was drawing quietly in the corner of the room, looked up. Actually, we found Elena, he said with the frankness typical of children. Rachel frowned, confused. Elena, like in the legends. Not exactly like in the legends, explained Sarah, choosing her words carefully. But yes, someone who calls herself Elena. She has a knowledge about the region and its traditions. The biologist seemed intrigued, but didn't press further. Instead, she took an old book with a time-worn cover from her backpack. I found something interesting about that symbol that appeared in your yard, she said, opening the book to a marked page. It's a Cherokee symbol associated with transition between worlds. The ancients believed there were portals in certain locations in the mountains, especially near caves and springs. Ethan felt a chill upon hearing those words, so close to what Elena had revealed to them. And do you believe this? He asked, closely observing the scientist's reaction. Rachel hesitated, an expression of conflict passing across her face. As a biologist, I should say no, but she closed the book, thoughtful. After what I saw happen with that fox, my mind is more open to possibilities I would have dismissed before. After Rachel's departure, the family gathered to discuss the next steps. Elena had been clear. The full moon 3 days away would be the ideal time for restoring the balance between the worlds. But what exactly that meant and what they should do were still questions without complete answers. We need to go back to the cave, said Sam, with a seriousness that contrasted with his age. Eleanor will teach us what to do. Sarah observed her son with a mixture of pride and concern. In a few days, he seemed to have matured years, embracing his special heritage with surprising acceptance. Aren't you afraid, Sam? She asked gently. The boy considered the question for a moment. A little, he admitted, but I'm excited too. It's like I finally understand why I always felt different. Ethan, who had been lost in thought, approached the family. Since drinking the water in the cave, fragments of forgotten memories continued to emerge in his consciousness. Memories of a grandfather who had taught him about the symbols, about how to listen to the voice of the forest, abilities he had gradually lost as he grew up and adapted to the normal world. We need to prepare properly, he said. Elena mentioned that I had a purpose I forgot. I think part of that purpose was to protect the boundary, just as my grandfather did. How can we prepare for something we barely understand? Questioned Sarah, pragmatic as always, despite the extraordinary circumstances. Ethan smiled, recognizing the irony of the situation. I think we need to trust our intuition more and conventional logic less. In the following hours, following an inexplicable impulse, Ethan reorganized his office, unearthing boxes of his grandfather's belongings that he had never fully examined. Among old books and yellowed photographs, he found a leather-bound diary, the pages filled with an elegant and aged handwriting. Look at this, he called, as the family gathered around the kitchen table. These are my grandfather's notes, and they have the same symbols that Sam drew. The diary contained detailed descriptions of rituals, maps of locations in the mountains marked with the circular symbols, and observations about lunar cycles and seasonal changes. But most surprising were the mentions of a guardian with ancient eyes and the passage between worlds. He knew, murmured Ethan, leafing through the pages with reverence. All this time, I thought they were just folk stories. He liked to tell. Sarah, who until then had kept one foot firmly planted in rationality, felt increasingly convinced of the extraordinary truth they had discovered. The coincidences were too many to be ignored. What exactly do we need to do on the night of the full moon? She asked, leaning in to study the diary. Ethan pointed to a detailed drawing of a ritual. According to these notes, we need to be at Swallow's Cave when the moon reaches its highest point. The portal between worlds will be most accessible then. And after that? Insisted Sarah. Ethan turned a few more pages, his expression becoming concerned. That's what isn't clear. There are mentions of a necessary sacrifice and a guardian who must choose his world. Sam, who had been unusually quiet, spoke softly. Elena said that someone with blood from both worlds needs to restore the balance. I think that's me. The silence that followed weighed like lead. The idea of their 9-year-old son carrying such responsibility was disturbing to the parents, no matter how special he might be. "We don't know exactly what that means," said Sarah finally. "We need to return to the cave and talk to Elena," before jumping to hasty conclusions. As they prepared for bed that night, strange events continued to occur around the house. Objects changed places, lights flickered without apparent reason, and a sensation of being watched persisted, especially in moments of silence. Ethan, unable to sleep, got up in the middle of the night and went to the window. Outside, under the growing moonlight, he saw a familiar figure in the yard, the silver fox, its bright eyes fixed on the house. This time, however, there was no fear or estrangement, only a silent understanding that they were on the verge of something transformative. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The night of the full moon arrived with a surreal clarity. The atmosphere in Cedar Heights seemed charged with expectation. The air denser, the sounds of the forest sharper, the stars brighter against the black velvet of the sky. The Mitchell family dined in an uncharacteristic silence, each immersed in their own thoughts about what awaited them. Ethan's grandfather's diary remained open on the table, like a silent fifth guest supervising the meal. "Does everyone understand what we need to do?" asked Ethan, finally breaking the silence. According to the notes in the diary, they should arrive at Swallow's Cave before midnight, bringing certain items: water from a pure spring, which they had collected that morning, specific herbs, which surprisingly grew in their own yard, and something personal from each family member. Sam nodded solemnly, holding the small cloth bag where he had stored a feather he had found years ago and always considered special. Sarah had chosen the silver brooch her grandmother had given her, while Ethan opted for a small pocket knife that had belonged to his grandfather. "What do you think will happen exactly?" asked Sarah, restless. Since the discovery of the truth about Ethan and Sam, she had oscillated between fascination and concern. "The diary mentions the restoration of balance," replied Ethan, pointing to a specific passage. "Apparently, the boundary between worlds is wearing thin, allowing energies to flow incorrectly." "It's like a wound," intervened Sam, with an understanding that surprised his parents. "We need to close it before it gets infected." Sarah and Ethan exchanged concerned looks. It was disconcerting to hear such words coming from their son's mouth. After dinner, they prepared in silence. The walk to the cave would take approximately 40 minutes, and they wanted to arrive with time to spare. They left the house when the clock marked 10:30 p.m. The nocturnal forest would normally be intimidating, but on that specific night, it seemed welcoming, almost as if guiding them. The path was illuminated by the glow of the full moon, so intense that it dispensed with the flashlights they had brought as a precaution. "It's as if the forest knows where we're going," commented Sarah, noting how obstacles seemed to naturally move away, facilitating their passage. Sam walked ahead, moving with unusual confidence for a child amid the night forest. Occasionally he stopped and pointed to almost imperceptible marks on the trees, subtle symbols that corresponded to those in his drawings. "We're on the right path," he would say, without any doubt in his voice. They arrived at the entrance to Swallow's Cave shortly before 11:30 p.m. The opening in the rock, which during the day seemed just a curious geological formation, now emanated a soft bluish glow, similar to what they had seen on their previous visit. "She's waiting," said Sam, pointing to the entrance. Indeed, Elena's silhouette was visible against the ethereal glow coming from inside, no longer in the form of the silver fox, but in her human appearance, the elderly woman with white hair and ancient eyes that radiated wisdom and power. "You came," she said as they approached. It wasn't a question, but a satisfied observation. "And you brought what was needed." Ethan handed over the bag with the requested items, feeling a strange reverence in the presence of the Guardian. "We're ready," he said. "But I need to know exactly what this ritual involves, especially Sam's role." Elena nodded, understanding. "A father's concern is just." She gestured for them to follow her into the cave. "Let's go inside and I'll explain everything before we begin." The interior was different from the last visit. The central space now contained a circle of white stones, and the crystals in the walls pulsed with more intensity, as if responding to the energy of the full moon. Elena pointed to the center of the circle. The boundary between our worlds is thinnest here. It has always been so, but recently it has begun to rupture. This happens periodically, every few generations, and we always need a guardian with mixed blood to restore it. And that guardian would be Sam? Asked Sarah, the apprehension evident in her voice. Not exactly, replied Elena, surprising them. Sam has the gift of sight. He can clearly see both sides of the boundary, but the true guardian, she looked directly at Ethan, is you, as was your grandfather before you. Ethan felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. Me? But I don't remember. I don't know how. You will know, assured Elena. Your body remembers, even if your mind has forgotten, and Sam will serve as your anchor, keeping you connected to this world while you work between the two. Sarah, advanced, protective. Is this dangerous for either of them? Elena considered the question with seriousness. There are always risks when working at the boundaries between worlds, but the greatest risk now is doing nothing. The rupture is growing, and soon it will begin to affect both sides in unpredictable ways. The explanation didn't completely calm Sarah, but there was a growing understanding that they were involved in something greater than themselves. How will the ritual work? Asked Ethan, trying to focus on the practical aspects. Elena took the items they had brought and began positioning them strategically around the circle of stones. The personal objects will serve as anchors for each of you. The spring water will purify the space. The herbs will amplify the natural energy. She turned to Ethan. You will stand in the center of the circle. Sam will stand here, she pointed to a specific position, serving as your connection to this side. Sarah will stand here, she indicated the opposite side, representing the stabilizing force of the family. And what exactly will I do in the center? Asked Ethan, still unsure. Elena smiled gently. You will know when the moment comes. Your blood will recognize the way. The moon reached its zenith, and a beam of silver light penetrated through a natural opening in the roof of the cave, illuminating directly the center of the circle. It was the sign that the time had come. Each took their designated position. Elena began to chant softly in an ancient language that, surprisingly, both Ethan and Sam seemed to understand instinctively. The energy in the cave changed. The air became denser, almost electric. The crystals in the walls intensified their glow, creating patterns of light that danced through the space. Ethan, in the center of the circle, felt a deep connection to something beyond himself, as if he were simultaneously present in the cave and somewhere else, a space between worlds. Through this new perception, he could see the rupture that Elena had mentioned, a luminous fissure in the very fabric of reality, pulsing like an open wound. Following an impulse that came from somewhere deep in his ancestry, he extended his hands toward the fissure. Energy flowed through him, from the ground through his feet, rising through his body to his fingertips. The sensation was simultaneously painful and exhilarating. Sam, in his position, began to draw the symbols in the air, his fingers leaving luminous trails that remained visible for a few moments. Each symbol seemed to strengthen Ethan, making his connection to the fissure more stable. It's working, murmured Elena, her voice distant as if coming from far away. Continue, Guardian. Restore what has been broken. Ethan's consciousness expanded, freeing itself from the confines of his physical body. He could see the cave from an impossible perspective, as if observing simultaneously from various angles. He saw the circle of stones, saw his own body in the center, Sam and Sarah in their designated positions, and Elena completing the ritual arrangement. But he saw more than that. The physical reality of the cave was just one layer, and now he saw beyond, an adjacent plane, a parallel world that existed in the same space, but at a different frequency. This other world was more vibrant, more alive in a way, with colors that had no name in the known human spectrum and forms that defied conventional geometry. The hidden world, he whispered to himself, the name emerging naturally in his consciousness. At the intersection between the two worlds, the fissure was clearly visible, a pulsing irregularity in the fabric of reality, like a tear in a thin veil. Through it, energies flowed incorrectly, creating imbalances on both sides. "Guide your hands to the rupture," instructed Elena's voice, sounding simultaneously in his physical ears and directly in his expanded mind. "You need to reconnect the energy patterns." Following her guidance, Ethan extended his hands, both the physical ones and those of his expanded consciousness, toward the fissure. He felt an initial resistance, as if pushing against a powerful current. "It's difficult," he spoke, his voice sounding strange even to himself. "There's so much pressure." "Use your family connection," Elena guided. "Sam can see the rupture clearly. Let him guide your hands." As if responding to the command, Sam began to draw more complex symbols in the air, creating luminous patterns that aligned with the structure of the fissure. Each symbol he traced seemed to create a map for Ethan, showing him where and how to manipulate the energies between the worlds. Sarah, although unable to see what Ethan and Sam saw, felt the intensity of the moment. The temperature in the cave fluctuated drastically, now glacial cold, now suffocating heat. The crystals in the walls pulsed in a rhythm that seemed synchronized with the heartbeats of the participants. "It's working," said Elena, observing attentively. "Continue." Ethan felt divided between two worlds, stretched like an elastic near its breaking point. The sensation was simultaneously painful and transcendent. Through the fissure, he began to glimpse not just the hidden world, but also its inhabitants, ethereal forms that moved with fluid grace, some vaguely humanoid, others completely alien. And then he saw something familiar, a figure that resembled his grandfather, younger and more vibrant than in his memories, but unmistakably the E. Same man who had told him magical stories in childhood. "Grandpa," he whispered, perplexed. The figure smiled, silently confirming, and extended his hand through the fissure, not in a gesture to cross over, but as if offering help in the repair process. "He chose," said Elena, her voice carrying a new meaning. "When his time came, your grandfather chose the hidden world, becoming a full guardian. But he never stopped watching over his family." The revelation hit Ethan like a wave. The stories, the symbols, the peculiar teachings, his grandfather had been preparing him since childhood for this moment. With renewed determination, Ethan accepted his grandfather's extended hand, not physically, but on a plane where matter and energy were the same thing. Together they began to reweave the torn fabric between the worlds. The process was meticulous and required absolute precision. Each energy filament needed to be realigned exactly in the correct pattern. Sam continued to draw guiding symbols, now with impressive speed, his fingers leaving luminous trails that remained suspended in the air for several seconds. Sarah, in her position, felt increasingly connected to the ritual, despite not sharing the same expanded perception. A sensation of warmth spread from her chest to her limbs, and she intuitively understood that she was providing a form of stabilizing energy essential to the process. "The family is the anchor," explained Elena, perceiving Sarah's understanding. "The guardian needs something to bring him back, to remind him of where he belongs, or he may become lost between worlds." The words carried a subtle warning that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. Was this then the necessary sacrifice mentioned in the diary, the risk of Ethan getting lost in the threshold between worlds, being pulled completely into the hidden world as his grandfather had been? "Ethan," she called with determination, "remember who you are. Remember where your heart lies." Her voice traversed the plains, reaching Ethan in his expanded consciousness. He felt the pull of family, the necessary counterweight to not let himself be completely absorbed by the fascination of the hidden world. His grandfather's figure nodded with approval, as if perfectly understanding the dynamics at play. Together they accelerated the process of repairing the fissure, weaving complex energy patterns that gradually restored the integrity of the boundary. Sam, without losing the rhythm of his symbolic drawings, spoke for the first time since the beginning of the ritual. "It's almost complete, just need the final seal." Eleanor, who observed with eyes that seemed to see through dimensions, approached the circle. "The seal requires a conscious choice, Guardian. You must decide to which world your heart truly belongs." Ethan then understood the magnitude of the moment. His grandfather had made this choice before him, opting for the hidden world. Now it was his turn to decide, remain in the human world with his family, or fully embrace his legacy as a guardian in the parallel world. For a moment, he felt divided. The hidden world called to him with an ancestral familiarity, promising knowledge and experiences beyond common human understanding. It would be easy to let himself be carried away by that call, follow in his grandfather's footsteps, become something beyond human. But then his gaze met Sarah's eyes, determined, loving, anchored in the reality they shared. And he saw Sam, his son, a natural bridge between the worlds, who didn't need to choose because he was already part of both. The answer came with absolute clarity. His place was here, with them. He could be a guardian without abdicating his humanity, just as Sam would be after him. "I choose this world," he declared firmly. "I choose my family." His grandfather smiled with what seemed to be pride, and in a final silent communication showed Ethan how to finalize the seal without needing to permanently cross to the other side. With a simultaneous gesture in both planes, Ethan completed the energy pattern. The fissure began to close, its irregular contours smoothing out, the instability giving way to a solid yet permeable boundary, not a wall, but a membrane that would allow controlled and beneficial exchanges between the worlds. A flash of light exploded in the center of the circle, so intense that everyone needed to shield their eyes. When the luminosity diminished, Ethan was on his knees in the center of the stone circle, physically exhausted but spiritually complete in a way he had never experienced before. The days following the ritual were ones of readjustment for the Mitchell family. They returned home in the early morning, physically and emotionally exhausted, especially Ethan, who slept almost 24 hours straight after the event in the cave. When he finally awoke, he felt simultaneously the same, and completely transformed. It was as if he had lived two lives until that moment, the everyday existence he had always known, and another, older and deeper, that now integrated into his consciousness. "How are you feeling?" asked Sarah, bringing him a cup of herbal tea made from herbs gathered from the garden. Ethan inhaled the comforting aroma before responding. "It's hard to explain. It's like I found a piece of myself I didn't even know was missing." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, observing her husband with curiosity and a new respect. "Do you remember everything that happened in the cave?" "Yes, every detail." Ethan briefly closed his eyes, reliving the transcendental experience. "I saw my grandfather, Sarah. He's well, just in another place, another plane." Sarah took his hand, squeezing it gently. During all the time they had been together, Ethan rarely spoke of his grandfather, except to occasionally mention the folk stories the old man told him. Now she understood why. They weren't just stories, but a preparation, a legacy passed forward. "And what about the fissure? Did we fix it?" Ethan nodded, a tranquil smile illuminating his tired face. "Yes, the boundary is stable now, at least for another generation. After that," his gaze shifted to the door, where Sam was timidly peeping in. "After that, it will be someone else's turn to take on the responsibility." The boy entered the room, climbing onto the bed with the naturalness of children. There was a new bond between father and son, a mutual understanding that transcended words. "Did you see Grandpa too?" asked Sam, nestling between his parents. "Yes, son, he sent a special hug for you." Sam's eyes shone. "I knew he was there. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see him clearly like you." Sarah observed the interaction, marveling at the ease with which they accepted the extraordinary. 2 weeks ago, a conversation like this would have been unthinkable in their family. Now it seemed perfectly natural. "Eleanor said she would visit us," commented Sam, casual as one mentioning the visit of a distant aunt. Ethan exchanged a significant look with Sarah. "When did she tell you that, son?" "Last night in my dream, but it wasn't exactly a dream." Sam shrugged as if the distinction between dreams and reality were an unimportant detail. "She said we still have a lot to learn about our gifts." The word hung in the air, laden with possibilities. Gifts, not an anomaly or a strangeness, but presence passed through generations, linking them to something greater than themselves. In the following days, Ethan discovered that his perception of the world had permanently expanded. not in the same intense way he had experienced during the ritual, but as an additional awareness that operated in parallel with his normal senses. He could feel life pulsing in the trees of the yard, perceive the energy currents that flowed through the earth, and occasionally glimpse momentary reflections of the hidden world superimposed on the everyday, especially in tranquil places like the garden at dawn or the porch under moonlight. Sam, in turn, continued to draw his symbols, but now with purpose and understanding. Ethan began to teach him based on recovered memories and the knowledge transmitted by his grandfather through the connection established during the ritual. Sarah, although not directly sharing the supernatural heritage, discovered her own role in that new family dynamic. Her analytical and organizing nature made her perfect for documenting and systematizing the knowledge that Ethan and Sam accumulated, a work she initially accepted for practicality, but which gradually transformed into a passion. On a particularly sunny morning, while Ethan worked in his office, now reorganized to accommodate both his architectural projects and studies on the hidden world, Sarah entered holding a package wrapped in rustic fabric. "Look what I found, buried beneath the oak tree at the back of the yard," she said, placing the package on the desk. Ethan looked curious. "How did you know it was there?" Sarah smiled, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. "I dreamed about it, or at least I thought it was a dream until I started digging and found it exactly where I imagined." Carefully, they unwrapped the package, revealing a small chest of carved wood with the same circular symbols that were now so familiar to them. Inside, they found a set of crystals, carefully stored dried herbs, and a leather-bound notebook very similar to Ethan's grandfather's diary, but completely blank. "I think this is for you," said Ethan, handing the notebook to Sarah, "to record our journey." She accepted the gift with reverence, feeling the weight of the responsibility that accompanied that simple object. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" she murmured, half question, half statement. "Accepting this heritage." Ethan nodded, serene. "It's not just a choice, Sarah. It's who we are, who we've always been, even without knowing." A noise at the door called their attention. Sam was there, observing them with eyes that seemed much older than his 9 years. "Eleanor is here," he announced simply. They followed the boy to the porch, where the elderly woman awaited them. There was no sign of how she had arrived there, no car in the driveway, no sound of footsteps on the gravel path. "The balance has been restored," she said, without preamble, a satisfied smile on her wrinkled face. "But you did well." "Thank you for guiding us," replied Ethan, realizing there was no need for formalities with someone who had already shared such a profound experience. "What happens now?" asked Sarah, always practical. Elena looked at each of them at length before responding. "Now you learn to live between the worlds, to be guardians without abdicating your human lives," her gaze fixed especially on Sam, "and prepare the next generation for when their time comes." The boy nodded with unusual seriousness, as if already fully comprehending the legacy he carried. "You are not alone in this," continued Elena. "There are others like you, scattered in places where the boundaries are thinner. With time, you will meet some of them." Ethan felt a wave of relief upon hearing that. There were others, other families navigating between the ordinary and the extraordinary, balancing on the frontier between worlds. "And what about you?" asked Sam, giving voice to everyone's curiosity. "Will you continue to visit us?" Eleanor smiled enigmatically. "I will be around, though not always in this form. The silver fox is also part of who I am." As they talked, the sun began to set, tinting the sky with shades of orange and purple. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, bringing the sea aroma of damp earth and wildflowers. "There is one last thing I need to show you," said Elena, standing up. "Something important for your future as guardians." Elena led them through the yard to a densely wooded area that marked the transition between the Mitchells' property and the native forest. Twilight was rapidly advancing, but strangely, visibility didn't diminish for any of them. "Here," said the elderly woman, stopping before a particularly ancient tree, an oak whose circumference suggested centuries of existence. "This is one of the natural portals." Ethan immediately felt what she meant. There was a special quality in the air around the tree, a subtle vibration that resonated with something inside him. "A portal?" questioned Sarah, cautiously advancing. "Like the one in the cave." "Similar but different," explained Elena. The cave is a point where the worlds naturally overlap, allowing complex rituals like the one we performed. This," she caressed the tree trunk with familiarity, "is a more direct path, albeit more discreet." Sam approached the tree, placing his hand on the rough bark. His eyes widened in surprise. "I can feel it. It's like a buzzing." Elena smiled, with approval. "The boy's sensitivity is impressive. Yes, it's the portal's energy you feel, Sam." Turning to the adults, she continued. "There are several of these scattered throughout the mountains. Ancient trees, springs, specific rock formations, places where the boundary between worlds is naturally more permeable." "And what exactly are they for?" asked Ethan, intuiting that there was a practical function beyond theoretical interest. "Communication mainly," replied Elena. "Through these portals you can send and receive messages from the hidden world without the need for elaborate rituals. With practice, Sam will eventually even be able to briefly glimpse the other side." "Is it safe?" The concern was evident in Sarah's voice. "With proper training, yes." Elena looked significantly at Ethan. "That's why the Guardian must gradually instruct his successor. Responsibility comes with knowledge and preparation." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. Being a Guardian wasn't just an honorary title. It was a lifelong commitment, a legacy to be preserved and transmitted. "Are there other Guardians currently?" he asked, curious about how many shared that peculiar mission. "Some," confirmed Elena. "Most don't fully know what they are, living with the sensation that there's something more in the world that they can't quite reach. Others, like your grandfather, chose to cross permanently." She made a significant pause. "You made a different choice, and that will shape your path in distinct ways." "How can we find them? The other Guardians?" Sarah's question was laden with hope, the possibility of a community, of not being so alone in that extraordinary journey. "Some will find you, attracted by the stability you've created here," replied Elena. "Others you will instinctively recognize during your lives. The blood of Guardians resonates with each other." The sun had completely disappeared over the horizon, and the first star of the night shone in the darkened sky. The contours of the forest became diffuse in the twilight, but the oak seemed to emanate its own luminosity, subtle but undeniable. "There is one more thing," said Eleanor, removing from her garments a small object that she handed to Sam. It was an amulet made of wood, carved with the now familiar circular symbols and inlaid with small crystals that captured the starlight. "This is a beacon. Use it when you need guidance or in case of emergency. I will feel the call wherever I am." Sam accepted the gift with reverence, his eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. To Sarah, Eleanor handed a small vial, containing a bluish liquid that twinkled as if containing miniature stars. "Water from the silver spring, from the heart of the hidden world. A few drops will bring true dreams, visions that can guide you when the path isn't clear." Finally, she turned to Ethan, extending to him an object wrapped in fabric, an ancient dagger with a carved bone handle and a blade. That seemed made of an unknown metal, with iridescent reflections under the starlight. "The boundary blade," she explained. "It's not a common weapon, but a tool. It can cut beyond physical matter, open temporary paths, seal smaller breaches, protect against hostile energies." Ethan felt the weight of the dagger in his hand, surprisingly light but charged with a power he instinctively recognized. "I hope I don't need to use it," he commented. "I hope the same," agreed Eleanor. "But it's better to be prepared. Not all creatures from the hidden world are benevolent, just as not all humans are." The words brought a sober reminder that their new reality, though wonderful, was not exempt from risks and responsibilities. "How will we know what to do?" asked Sarah, verbalizing the insecurity they all felt in the face of this new path. Eleanor smiled gently. "The knowledge will come gradually, part of it through dreams and intuitions, part through your grandfather's diary, she nodded to Ethan, and part through experience itself. Trust yourselves and each other. Night had completely settled now, the starry sky extending infinitely above them. Eleanor looked up, as if receiving some kind of silent communication. It's time for me to depart, she said. But we won't truly be separated. The worlds are connected now in a healthy and balanced way, thanks to you. Without further ceremony, Elena took a few steps toward the darkness of the forest. Her body seemed to become translucent, dissolving into a silvery luminosity that gradually assumed the familiar form of the fox. The animal looked at them one last time, bright and intelligent eyes, before disappearing among the trees. "Will she come back?" asked Sam, his voice small in the vastness of the night. "Yes," replied Ethan with certainty. "In one form or another?" They remained there for some time, the three of them together under the starry sky, each absorbing in their own way the enormity of the transformation they had experienced. Their lives would never be the same, but the change didn't seem frightening. On the contrary, there was a feeling of return, as if they were finally on the path they should have always followed. When they finally returned home, the sensation of harmony was palpable. The house seemed more alive somehow, more connected to the earth where it had been built. In the weeks and months that followed, the Mitchell family found a new rhythm. Ethan continued his work as an architect, but now infused his projects with a deeper understanding of the relationship between space and energy. Sarah initiated research on folklore and indigenous traditions, discovering fascinating parallels with what they had learned about the hidden world. Sam grew with a wisdom beyond his years, but without losing the joy and spontaneity of childhood. Together, they dedicated time to exploring their new gifts, Ethan learning to consciously navigate between the layers of reality, Sam developing his natural vision of energy patterns, and Sarah discovering, to her surprise, a growing sensitivity that she attributed to close coexistence with the magic that now permeated their home. Occasionally, they received signs from the hidden world, a symbol appearing spontaneously in a puddle of water, a dream shared by all three on the same night, the glimpse of the silver fox at the edges of the property. Each occurrence was carefully documented in Sarah's notebook, creating a new record for future generations. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when Sam was already asleep and the house was at peace, Ethan and Sarah would sit on the porch, contemplating the stars and the forest that held so many secrets. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked once. "Not choosing the other side, like your grandfather?" Ethan considered the question, feeling the night breeze caress his face. "No," he finally answered, with absolute certainty. "My place is here, between the worlds, with you and with Sam." Sarah smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "Between the worlds," she repeated softly. The phrase perfectly captured their new reality, not belonging completely to a single plane of existence, but creating their own unique space at the intersection between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the known and the mysterious, the human and the magical. And in that space between worlds, they had found not just a purpose, but also a fullness they never imagined possible, guardians of a threshold invisible to many, but which now, for them, was as real and vital as the air they breathed. As the night advanced, a shooting star streaked across the sky, and at the same instant, one of the circular symbols briefly glowed on the skin of Ethan's wrist. A coincidence to some, but for the Mitchell family, just another reminder of the magic that had always been present, waiting only for eyes capable of seeing it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from.